All right, hello there, thrill seekers, and that was a little snip of the song Inagata Vida, made famous by Iron Butterfly, and that was in honor of the late Doug Ingle, keyboardist and singer of the Iron Butterfly, who passed away, I think, last week, and I felt moved because that Iron Butterfly was one of my favorite bands. There's an interview somewhere in some little zine in the early 80s where Zero Defects is getting interviewed, and they're asking each of us who our main influences are, and I said Iron Butterfly and King Crimson, which annoyed the rest of the band, I think. Anyway, and I also incorporated the Beatles' song Blue Jay Way and Cream's song Sunshine of Your Love, so pay attention. So I wanted to talk about a subject that I feel like I've talked about enough on this channel, and it is one of my FAQs. I don't know, people don't seem to know this, but I have an FAQ up online, and it's at hardcorezen.info/FAQ. And I haven't updated it for years, but it's got a lot of the questions that I keep getting asked all the time, and one of them that I put up there 10 years ago is, or more, oh God, a long time ago, is the question of why can't I just study Zen by watching your videos and watching shows on Jack Haubner's videos and watching Doug's Dharma or whatever, and skip the whole thing of having a teacher. It's a really difficult question to answer because it's kind of one of these things that's a little bit hard to put your finger on exactly. But I thought of a metaphor that I might have used before. I keep feeling that I might have said this before in a previous video, but who cares? And it's like the difference between so-called distance learning and in-person learning. My wife is an educator. She's not a school teacher now. She was when I met her. Now she does she does this thing. What do they call it? Educational coach, I think. Anyway, it's sort of a teacher of teachers. But in the year 2020, she was often called upon to teach distance learning elementary school classes, like first through third grade or even kindergarten classes, online. And because at the time we lived in a little 500 square foot apartment, I don't know what that is in meters, you'll have to go look it up, but a real small apartment with just 2 rooms and a kitchen and a bathroom, obviously. So I was often in the same room with her when she was doing these online kindergarten through third grade classes, just out of camera range, but just sitting there watching the whole thing happen. And it was a disaster. It was just, there was nothing like learning going on. I could see half the kids would have their cameras turned off because I think the school didn't require them to have them turned on for, I don't know, probably some kind of legal reasons or something. And so those kids were probably not even there. And then the ones who I could see were just kind of, you just see these faces, like they look like this. You know, and then they'd go off and go have cereal or something and come back. There was nothing. There was nothing going on. And even the kids who were paying attention, and there were a few, and were trying to participate, it was such a lousy way to learn that there was no education happening during those years that the schools were shut down. In Los Angeles, they were shut down probably longer than anywhere else in the country because we have lousy government in Los Angeles. One of the reasons I moved out of Los Angeles, but let's leave that aside. But the thing is, it's sort of fascinating to me that in-person learning is still a thing. I mean, I can see why it is now, but there was a time in the past. Okay, let me give you an example because I brought one up. Back when I grew up, things like this were common. What I'm going to show you is Japanese, but there were things like this for Americans too, but I just don't have any. I'm a collector of weird Japanese ephemera. And this is a reprint from a Japanese magazine of the 1970s, probably, circa 1973 to 5 or something around there, when I was in elementary school. And it is showing what school will be like in the far-off 21st century. So everybody's going to be learning by looking at their little computer devices, and the teachers are just going to come right into their home on the computers and show them how to spell dog and cat and cast for some reason. And this kid on the corner here is looking at Shonen Magazine, which is the magazine that this appeared in. Young People's Magazine, I guess is a good translation for that. And this says, what does it say? Kyoryoku Joho Center. So Education Information Center. And the text says how we're gonna all be learning this way, or kids are all gonna be learning this way in the future. And we thought that was gonna happen, and we thought that was gonna work. Well, it just doesn't. It just doesn't work. And so in-person education continues to be an important thing. And this is the same reason in-person education in Zen is an important thing. I was talking to my wife about this, and she was saying that there's a lot of factors that, because she's paid to learn about these things. One of the things she mentioned that I thought was interesting was peer-to-peer learning that really can't happen when you're online, which is that kids learn from each other. So, the teacher is teaching a lesson and a couple of kids one kid understands the lesson a little better than the other kid and can explain it. This is a kind of a phenomenon that people have observed for a long time, is often if an adult explains something to, let's say, a 10-year-old, the 10-year-old can translate that for an 8-year-old in a way that the adult can't. It's almost like a translation. So that happens even if the kids are the same age, and that also happens in the Zen realm. You learn from your sangha members, which doesn't always mean that your sangha members are particularly wise or insightful. I often learned a lot from the uninsightfulness of my fellow sangha members, or the way they didn't get it. And that was also educational for me, and I could see my own mistakes in the practice through the mistakes that other people made, and I could see sometimes the poor behavior of other people was instructive in telling me how to not behave like that. So that's, and of course the other side exists, which I sort of poo-pooed just now, which is that sometimes you do have somebody who is kind of insightful within the group that you're in, who might get your teacher a little better than you get it, and can explain something to you in a way that the teacher might not be able to explain it. So you get a lot of that. There's a metaphor that's often used in Zen, which I like, because when I was a little kid, I had a rock tumbler. One of the things I got for a Christmas gift, one of the weird Christmas gifts that I got that I ended up enjoying more than I expected to, was a rock tumbler. And I don't know, maybe kids today don't get rock tumblers, but it was this thing where you could put exotic rocks in, and they rub together. So it was like a little centrifuge or something. I don't know, would turn them around and make them knock into each other. And this would cause a lot of the stuff to break off the rocks, and the individual rocks would then come out real smooth and shiny, and they look like little, depending on what you put in there, they could look like little exotic jewels and things. It was kind of cool, especially because I got this when we lived in Africa, and there seemed to be a more exotic rocks laying around in the Nairobi area than there were in Akron. I don't know why, but anyway. So often that's used as a metaphor to understand what happens. Sometimes they talk about it in terms of potatoes, because I guess that's one of the ways you clean potatoes, is just put a bunch of potatoes together and let them knock around, and they knock the dirt off each other. That often happens, so you don't get that if you're doing distance learning in Zen, or if you're just watching videos. The thing about the videos is they might give you the kind of false impression that I'm right there in the room with you, teaching you, but I'm not. I think of the videos that I do as a form of entertainment. This is the way I think of my books too. So when I'm doing these videos, I'm taking on the role of an entertainer. And I don't think there's any problem with doing entertainment that is also educational. I happen to like educational entertainment, but I don't feel like when I watch a video by Antoine Petrov, I forget what his channel is, but he does these science videos. I think he lives in Korea, but he is Russian, maybe. Anyway, he does these great videos on astronomy and science, and I watch them all the time. There's a guy named Jean-Michel Gaudier who I sometimes watch, but he also does stuff about astronomy and things like that. And Dyson spheres is the big thing right now. In fact, there's a video on my queue that I'm going to watch after I finish this, where he's going to talk about they've discovered these stars that might be Dyson spheres, and if you want to find out what a Dyson sphere is, look it up. But it's aliens. And apparently they've discovered a bunch of candidates recently, which I think is interesting. But I don't watch those videos thinking that I'm getting the equivalent of a course in astrophysics like I would if I went to university and studied the subject. There's also this aspect of, if you have a teacher in person, and I was talking to my wife about this too, you can ask questions directly of that teacher which are very specific to your own understanding or lack thereof of the subject. And they just aren't going to be answered in a book. And also when you're with a group of people, this is something my wife pointed out that I'd forgotten, there's a tendency of like, if a lot of people have the same question, then one person asks it, then it helps everybody. And the teacher might not realize that he or she isn't explaining this particular aspect of the problem very well. So there's also that. And then there's this kind of X factor, which is that there is something about being in the actual vicinity of the person. And in the Hindu way of thinking about things, which is, as we all know, very much related to the Buddhist way, because they're both kind of out of the same milieu. The Buddhists don't talk about this that much, but the Hindus do. Is this, I think they call it Shaktipat. I may be getting that wrong. But it's this sort of energy that transfers from the student to the teacher. I'm not sure why the Buddhists dropped that idea, but I would expect that, especially in the case of Zen Buddhists, the reason we don't talk about that is it sounds a little woo-woo and floofy, and Zen tends to shy away from that sort of thing. But it also doesn't deny that sort of thing. So there is something that I can't explain, but it happens when you're in the vicinity of the teacher and you can feel something. It's like the metaphor, actually this does come up in Zen sometimes, is like a tuning fork. If you ever worked with a tuning fork, if you're not a musician, you might not, but there's this kind of thing. It's a little object that you hit, and it goes wee, and it helps you tune your guitar or your piano or whatever. But if you put a tuning fork next to another tuning fork, and hit the one tuning fork, the second tuning fork will often start vibrating sympathetically. It's called sympathetic vibrations. This is also the principle on which a sitar works. And I played sitar for a little while. I still have it, but it's broken now and I haven't gotten it repaired. But what was interesting about the sitar is it has these sympathetic strings under the main playing strings. And you don't play the sympathetic strings, but you have to get those sympathetic strings in tune. And that was always a chore, everybody knows who plays sitar that this is a nightmare, but you have to get the sympathetic strings in tune for the sitar to sound right, because part of what makes the sitar sound the way it does is when all the sympathetic strings are perfectly in tune, they start to resonate and go in this way that is you just don't get on a guitar or some other. You get a little bit of it on a 12-string guitar, but anyway, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent now. Anyway, it's like that. You get this sort of sympathetic vibration thing going on between the teacher and the student that just doesn't happen in a distance learning situation. It's not happening right now. I mean, you might be resonating with what I'm saying or agreeing with what I'm saying, but you're not getting that thing that you'd get if I was in the room with you. And one last thing about this that may be specific to me is that I get a lot of emails from people who are convinced that I am their teacher, like I am the guy who's going to be their teacher. What you don't know about me, if you haven't learned in person with me, is that I'm lousy. I'm just bad at it. This is one of the reasons why I do most of I just have turned to doing mostly entertainment, which is these videos and my books and things, because as an in-person teacher, I'm just terrible. I was actually, when I went to university, my university degree was in teaching, for trying to get teaching jobs at high schools. And I had the training, and I was terrible. I was just terrible. Just really, really, really bad at it, especially in terms of classroom management. And sadly, really sadly, classroom management is a huge part of what you need to be able to do to be a Zen teacher. I don't know if this is really so much the case in Asia, because I think people have generally more respect for the teacher over there than they do here. But I was terrible at classroom management, and when I was doing Zen teaching, there was a huge classroom management issue, and I just couldn't do it. Which is why I think we tend to think of ourselves as like mature and, adult people, and we're going to do this thing. I think it's better when you're thinking of Zen teaching to sort of consider yourself as a kindergartner, because usually that's the distance between the teacher and the student is often like the distance between an adult kindergarten teacher and a kindergarten student. And it's not like the distance between a university professor and a university student. We tend to think of it as the distance between the university professor and the university student, but most of the time it is not. It is a vast gulf. And a lot of people you just get these bad, bratty kids in kindergarten who are just going, meh, 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 I'm going to take over. This is what happened to me with the Zen Center. I ran in LA. One of the kindergartners took it over, and now look, I'm a master. So, I'll just leave that at that. But you're better off to think of yourself that way. Think of yourself as just a little kid trying to learn from an adult, rather than, you're gonna relate to your teacher as adult to adult, but in terms of understanding, there is that if the teacher is a good teacher, there is this sort of tipping point that teacher has gone over, and it took that teacher a lot of real hard work to get to that tipping point. And until you reach that tipping point, it's difficult. Really, it's nearly impossible to understand exactly what your teacher is telling you. I'm just telling you from my own experience. The difference between understanding Nishijima Roshi before I reached that tipping point and after was just an incredible gulf. Like just so don't think of yourself as like, I'm pretty much the same. That's probably not the best way to think about it. But this is, sorry, I've gone way off topic, and I apologize for that. But I think it's important to get this out there, that in-person teaching, in-person learning from a Zen teacher to a student is really an important part of this practice. And if you go to my FAQ section, which I'll tell you again, hardcorezen.info/FAQ, I put an excerpt there from my book Sit Down and Shut Up, which covers this topic in there in a probably different way than I'm talking about it now. And I believe I even put 2 other FAQs that also relate to this issue of why in-person teaching is important. So that's my little spiel for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you enjoyed it and want to help support this entertainment going on, I'm like a street performer with a little bucket in front of his, where he's juggling the knives or whatever. And if you want to put something in my bucket, the way to do that is to go to the links that are below. If you're watching this on YouTube, there are links to my Patreon and PayPal accounts, and you can just go directly to them by going below this video. And if you don't like that, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That will also take you to places with links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main way of making a living, and I really appreciate your support. But as always, you don't gotta support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Okay, there's Ziggy. He just got a bath today, which is why, I don't know if you can tell, but his hair is extra fluffy, and why I'm not taking him outside, because I don't want him to get dirty again. So, and he's sleeping it off, because baths are kind of... He seems to like the bath, but it's a bit of a stressful situation for him, so he's sleeping it off. All right, Ziggy, we'll see you later. Bye.